It is like an addiction. I really, truly believe it. I don't think it's possible that it couldn't be when you're gambling and I mean, essentially the stock market is a lot of gambling.
Yeah.
You know,
especially the way some of these people play it. It's one thing to say, I'm going to buy Coca-Cola and sell it in 25 years. It's another thing when you go, I'm going to buy Coca-Cola and sell it in 20 seconds.
Yep. But even if you're right, like if you say, no, look, it seems like a gamble to you because you're uneducated, but I, in fact, am very educated on this, and it's more of a calculated risk, but the reward to risk ratio is very high.
A lot of variables.
Yeah, but they can
That's
show
what every
you,
gambler always says.
But they can show you on paper, we've profited, X amount of years in a row. This is not nearly as unstable as you like to think it is. But part of the charge is the fact that it is a little.
Right.
So 2008 happens every now and then where fucking everybody's scrambling and no one's got a chair and the music just shut off.
Mm-hmm. What I love about that is when they show you go to the financial advisor's office and they always show you the way these things are performed historically, and it's always the graph starts right after the last terrible crash.
Right.
Yeah.
And you just go, well, what about the Depression? Well, the Depression was an unusual situation. That'll never happen again. And I think today they must start it from like last week, don't you think? Like here's your historical performance in the last 7-day period.
Yeah, we don't know. I think the idea of trying to control an entire global economy like that is preposterous. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't understand it at all, and the people that understand it have tried to comfort me and assure me that it does in fact make good sense.
Right, and if that's not scary enough, then you get the collusion of government and the weird economy where, I mean, when you think about the fact that there are no laws against the fact that if you have worked for some companies, you can pick up a government job overseeing the workings of those very companies, or vice versa. You are in government first, and the second you are done, you can pick up your vice president position in one of the companies that you just finished benefiting.
Yeah.
That's beyond perverted.
It's so transparent.
It's
exactly. One of the ways that they've said our society could go down, though, and other societies have throughout history, is that sometimes they just get too complex to manage. And you can ride that wave sometimes until something bad happens. But a perfect example is, I mean, a lot of people said that the Great Depression happened because what was going on in the financial system overwhelmed people's ability to understand and react and compensate for things. And I remember people saying, well, we'll never have another Great Depression because we're so on top of things now. Yeah, but we have new variables that we don't understand, that somebody in the future is going to say they were such idiots way back there in the early 21st century.
Well, me as a barely educated fool, when I look at exactly how everything has fluctuated and the crash in 2008 and all these, it makes zero sense. No. Because as a fool, I look at it and I go, look at this. There's the same amount of people. There's the same amount of metal, there's the same amount of concrete, the same amount of plastic, same amount of material things. No one has produced or taken away anything from the pile of humanity's creations. And yet, all of a sudden, everyone's broke. Like, all of a sudden, everything fell apart. And people who were prospering just a week ago are no longer prospering. When I look at something like that, I have to feel like, okay, these guys are obviously far smarter than I, and they're running the system. So either it's rigged as fuck, and someone just extracted a shitload of money out of the system and did it under the guise of a crash, or people are way fucking dumber than I give them credit. It's one of those two things. And I feel like when a guy like that cat from New York that ripped everybody off in the Ponzi scheme, the old dude, what is his name?
Bernie
Madoff. When a cat like Bernie Madoff comes along and robs so many people, I have to go, wait a minute. So no one knows how this thing works?
Well, but I mean, look, it's not that hard to understand when people are playing with things that aren't real, but selling it for real money, and then you're counting that as something that you own. For example, we take these toxic assets, right? It's not as hard to understand as people suggest, because let's say I put you in a house you can't afford, and all the evidence shows you can't afford it, and I wouldn't have given it to you 20 years ago, and then I take a bunch of people like you, and I take all of your bad things that you're never going to be paying back, and I bundle it into something, and then I sell that to someone else based on the value that isn't really there because none of you can really pay it back. And then you say, well, I'm worth this much money. I own these assets and they're worth this much money. And then those assets collapse. And all of a sudden you look like you had $50 million in your asset tree of stuff. And all of a sudden you don't. You bought something that was worth nothing. And so all that money that you had on paper just disappeared overnight because it wasn't real to begin with.
And weren't there banks during this crisis that were actually banking on things falling apart?
Hoping that they would,
Hedging,
exactly.
So profiting off of it falling apart.
It's supposed to be a risk management diversification tool.
Jesus Christ, that's a great way of saying we're fucking
exactly.
you. Risk
I'm
management.
just using the proper terminology.
I gotta write that down because that's a brilliant way of fucking someone in the ass. This is a risk management diversification.
Not a risk management for you, a risk management for them.
Right.
How do they describe risk management
Diversification tool.
That is goddamn hilarious. It's the greatest way to describe.
The cops in New Mexico said that to the guy.
That's right. Yeah. Searching your cavity is a risk management diversification tool.
I'm actually writing that down because it's so beautiful.
I think you should use that for all kinds. Use it in the MMA color commentary. Him throwing that punch that way is a risk management diversification tool.
If anybody hears that, though, if I pretended that I actually came up with that on my own, I would get shit to
all
no
the financial
end.
advisors who watch the MMA would be going, now he's talking.
If I'm saying it now, I have to say it as an inside joke.
Yeah.
Wink, wink.
Risk management diversification tool. That's how we're fucking you.
Beautiful.
That's hilarious. That's a brilliant way of putting it.
I'm out. Then I'm out.
But just the idea that could be legal, that you could be loaning people money, setting up loans, and also gambling on the fact that you'll profit if they default on those loans.
Look, we know you can't afford this mortgage, but don't worry. If you can't pay it, you'll be taken out of your house, and we'll win on this other side over here.
That's my point as like an uneducated fool. When I look at that system, I go, well, obviously they set it up so they can extract money. That's the only way it makes sense. If you have the same amount of people, you have the same amount of knowledge, you have the same amount of items, and yet all of a sudden everything fell apart. Somebody fucked you.
Yeah.
Okay? They just did it in a way that's legal.
No, but I mean, banks, I have to tell you a story because this is too crazy. I remember when I went from 2 incomes to 1 after my wife died and everything, and so I applied for the... I forgot how they call it, loan modification, right? It's like, conditions have changed, you can modify the loan to help somebody stay in the house, all that, right? So I get 2 letters from the bank in the same day. One, I open and it say, we can't give you the loan modification because you make too much money. You're doing too well, you don't need it. I open the next letter, it say, we can't give you a loan modification because there's no hope you can keep the house. You make too little money, there's just no way. And I'm like, what the fuck? Did you talk to each other at least? It's like, you're the same department. You're sending me, really? This is what it's about?
They just have, I bet, probably like patent excuses, especially when they feel like you're probably going to lose the house. They're like, good, we'll just snatch up his house.
This is where it gets better. I knew somebody who was hooked up with the people who own the loan, so through somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, we got to the president of the company like, hey man, can you do something? Is it something that we can work with and stuff? I kid you not, the guy sent back the word, give me 20,000 under the table and I can make it happen.
Oh
no
my
problem.
God. He asked for a bribe?
Yeah. That
Holy
open.
Shit.
And if he's doing that with me, I'm imagining that's probably regular business.
That's
right?
amazing.
But there's no paper trail, so you can prove it.
So you'd have to come up with 20 cash?
Yep.
20,000 in cash. Holy shit, that's a lot of money.
But it's like, look how much you're going to save over the next 30 years. It's worth it, and
that's hilarious.
I always think, to me, it's when you talk about them betting both sides of the fence, essentially. How is that different, though, from a lot of us probably know some pretty darn serious gamblers, and a lot of them set their sports bets up that way, where listen, if this happens, I win, and if that happens, I win too, and either way, I'm covered, and that's definitely how the house handles things. You know? And so that essentially, when we talk about the financial insiders in the economic realm, that's the house. Mm-hmm. So the house usually wins. Yeah, and it's not a fair game. I mean, I always say I love casinos. I love going to Vegas. I love doing fights there. But if you're smart, you look around and you realize, how do you think they built this giant fucking thing? That's right. They didn't build it on you cracking blackjack every week. They built it on people losing money here, man. That's what they're good at. They don't offer you those free trips and the free hotel rooms to come gamble because they're losing money on that. Yeah.